And for me, like, when did I fall in love with literature? I don't know. It's in my blood.
Hello everyone, and welcome to a new installment of the Talaku Effect. Today, I'm very happy and excited to have a conversation with Augusta Atinuke Irele. Augusta is a PhD candidate at the University of Pennsylvania, focusing on Africana Studies, comparative literature, and literary theory. She's a graduate coordinator for the Mellon Mays Undergraduate Fellowship. She's a graduate instructor at UPenn. She's a seasonal consultant at the Post Foundation, and she's running an online book called The Black Academia. So just by that introduction, I'm sure you might be excited to get to hear more about Augusta and her life. So Augusta, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Let's start at the beginning and talking about your childhood.
Yeah, actually, I was actually born in the U.S. I was born in Ohio, in Columbus. I'm the first person on either side of my family born outside of Nigeria. And on my mom's side, I am at this point still the only person. So, definitely the first. And so I grew up in Ohio. Both of my parents are from Nigeria. They both grew up in Lagos, although they're from different parts of Nigeria. And so we grew up. My dad was a professor. My mom is an academic librarian, and she was a teacher as well. And so we grew up in a very kind of African academic environment. Mm-hmm. Lots of other kind of African immigrant families from all over the place. Listened to a lot of, it was like everything from King Sunny Ade to like Kassav, right? From like Haiti. And, my dad's favorite musician was Kofi Olomide, right? And so we just listened to a lot of all kinds of stuff. And we're eating primarily African things until we had to go to elementary school and learn that some of the things that we thought were normal were not, or just abnormal to our friends. But I'm from a big family. I have 4 siblings, and so 4 sisters, all women in the house. My dad had such a big personality, so we were socialized to be very collective. I think of myself as part of a collective, and I think of myself as oriented towards collective because my dad was very social. Lots of people always coming in and out of the house, which was fun. I have lots of aunts and uncles who are not related to me at all, but I'm still connected to because they were part of that village that raised me.
Awesome. Mm-hmm. Nice. Were you in the neighborhood where you were living, were your neighbors Africans as well, or not really?
All white people. We were surrounded entirely by white people. The interesting thing, though, is that around the corner, my elementary school was a public elementary school in Columbus, Ohio, French immersion school. Most of the teachers at the school were themselves Belgian randomly. I had a few French folks from France, and then some like Francophone African teachers. And so a lot of the students were also, there were quite a few students who were also children of immigrants or immigrants themselves. Mm-hmm. And we grew up speaking French. And then my parents spoke Yoruba to us at home, but I started learning French in like kindergarten. And so that was a peculiarity about my experience that I don't know what it was or whose idea it was in the middle of the Midwest to start this school, but all 3 of us went there and then, launched from there to other communities. And it was there that I was interacting a lot more with other like young African children or other immigrant children from other parts of the world as well.
Got it. I see. I'm guessing, as you said, Kofi Olomide was probably helping a little bit with the French part as well at home. So at that point, I'm guessing then did the question of being, first of all, as a child, I'm not sure that you necessarily ask yourself, what is my identity? But at which point did you start asking yourself if you're African or not? Or did you even get to that stage where, okay, wow, I realized there's a difference between either me or my classmate, or when was that click?
Yeah, I actually think I felt different on 2 regards. First of all, because Columbus is what it is, there is a large population of East Africans in Columbus, lots of Somali folks and lots of Ethiopian people. Mm-hmm. However, West Africa was still outside of the academic circle. And at the time, my dad was teaching at Ohio State. So there was a strong kind of Black and African studies program there. And so a lot of his colleagues were the people that we grew up around. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I'd be in school and people would be calling my dad Jamaican. Like people would just hear the accent and not know what to do with it. And so I don't know that there was an epiphany moment for me. I do remember always feeling different, right? And always feeling like I had to defend or protect myself. And I think, the classic experience, my parents my mom is, and my father was, they're both highly educated. My dad moved here with a PhD. My mom moved here already with a master's degree and then did 2 more while we were in Columbus. But as we're moving around, there are still moments as like a child of an immigrant where you're still translating, right? So even though we're speaking English still, some people are not trained to hear accents. And so they hear the accent immediately, they tune it out. As the child who grew up with an American accent, and as I'm the middle child, but I'm my mom's eldest. Mm-hmm. And so that responsibility to be that kind of like social and just kind of cultural translator fell on me often. Mm-hmm. And I feel for that reason very protective of that difference, right? And I always felt kind of protective of my family's Africanness in that way. Plus, also, I mean, as kids, we went to Ghana when I was like maybe 8 or 9 for a family trip, and we came back with all kinds of dresses and clothing that I was rocking, like absolutely rocking through elementary school. And so I don't know, people, even if they didn't know African before we went to Ghana, we came back and we were like, just a reminder, we're not from here. And this clothing will show you why.
Nice. I like that story. I like when you mentioned that you were protective. Was it a struggle per se? Was it, looking back at it today, maybe with a different point of view, was it something that was difficult for you that you had to talk about or think about and actively act upon, or was it just part of growing up? It wasn't a big deal.
I see what you mean. It might be a cop-out, but I'm going to say both because I think it depended on the situation. So there was some times when, for example, like my mom would pack something in our lunch to go to school that was not what the other American kids were eating, And so then in that way, it was a deliberate, like, I'm protecting this food that I enjoy right at home and that I want to enjoy out here at school as well. Mm-hmm. And then there are sometimes when it's just instinct because we were raised so African that there's some things that Americans do that don't make sense to me, or that I have to make an effort to study and understand as a cultural kind of project versus like an intuitive, right? Like this is just how we do things in the US. And so some like musical references that even now at my old age, I still don't understand or get, some song. Beyonce just redid a song a few weeks ago that I was like, oh yeah, I think I've heard this once or twice, the original, but I don't know, and everyone's making a big deal. And they're like, this is what we line dance to. And I'm like, cool, have fun. I don't know what that is, And so, and it's still now, I still balance both between like, my instinct, right? Because this is how I was raised. And then also the effort to protect and feel, that is the sacred part of myself.
I see. That makes sense. Okay. Let's talk about the values that shape you today. And you talk about your parents being immigrants with both very high level of education. What type of values do you have today that you think are dating back to just how you were raised? And it's a tough question, but looking back at your childhood, what you were doing at home, the way you were raised, what are the couple values that you have in mind that you definitely know that are coming from that young age at home?
Yeah. My parents are both researchers. My dad was a professor and my mom, as I said, was an academic librarian and she was a scholar in her own right. And so she, as a librarian, him as a professor of literature specifically, although his degree was in sociology, this like curiosity about other people and other cultures and kind of openness to other cultures. Mm-hmm. They lived kind of in practice a Pan-African, but also like a global life. And that's what they built. So I always grew up around people from not only different parts of Nigeria, but like good friends from Sierra Leone, good friends from Bosnia, like all of these people. Like we had Congolese friends. One of my dad's best friends, they're from Benin Republic. Mm-hmm. And so we just kind of always had all kinds of different people and languages. My dad spoke a bunch of languages in his lots of friends. So that was one of the things, just kind of like cultural curiosity is something that I see as kind of a core value that I hold and would like to continue to kind of impart, on in other spaces. And I think is what drives me now in my work with students and in my work as an academic. And then the other thing, I don't know, any African immigrant that you'll meet will tell you that education is supreme, right? And so schoolwork, paying attention to what's going on in school, the teachers coming home, doing your work, right, and making sure that you're following the rules and that you're setting yourself up to be successful is just kind of the top one. Mm-hmm. The other thing, though, and I think this comes from my parents being immigrants, was they were very careful about what image you're projecting about yourself, because there's always a sense of vulnerability towards other people who might misunderstand or misjudge, right, what you're saying. And so there were lots of, I remember when I was in 7th grade, I moved to a new school and I was one of 2 Black students in the whole school. Wow. In junior high. It was a Catholic school. And I remember distinctly us driving and my mom being like, don't let them tell you you're on scholarship. Make sure your uniform is always clean. Like all these things, right? Like that are just kind of part of this like immigrant ethos of like, you do deserve to be there. Don't let anyone tell you you don't, right? But also protect what information you're sharing. So very few of my friends came to our house. I was always going to other people's houses, but very few of them came over. Sleepovers, I think maybe I had like 2. And my mom was like, I think that's enough, Things like, I remember in middle school, I was on a basketball team. We got very close to winning like the championship in our division. We lost in like the semifinal game or something. And I might be inflating this because I was in middle school, but I remember being very upset and crying and my mom being like, okay, that's enough. Like this is not, we're not going to cry in public. Like when we get home, then you can demonstrate that kind of emotion, because we really needed to be careful about how they're thinking about us, right? As the minority from a faraway place that most people don't know about. I was growing up and people were asking me if my grandparents lived in trees, right? And so some of these things we're still combating, and we need to be really careful about how we're playing into those stereotypes and images.
I see. Some sort of quest for external perfection. You can allow yourself to be weak or sad or whatever else. Any type of defects that you might have, that we all have as humans, you can show it at home. But outside in public, you need to stay as perfect as you can.
As polished, perfect. Obviously, there are lots of things, like my parents were always like, yeah, if you don't know something, don't pretend, right? Like we're not out here lying, but as polished as possible, because you're representing more than just yourself. It's not even just the family. It's in some cases it's all Africans everywhere, and in some cases it's like all Nigerians, and in other cases it's like maybe just Yoruba people. And I'm not even actually ethnically Yoruba, but that's a whole other story. But yeah, I was always aware of who else was with me, right, in the room or in what I was doing growing up. And I still feel that. I definitely still feel that.
Interesting. Is that heavy? Because I think, the way I experienced that going from Cameroon to France, there was part of that, like, hey, we're not sending you to France to just roll your thumbs and become, I don't know, whatever. So you're going there, you have to make us proud, the whole family, eventually Cameroon as well. I remember that the first 2 years of undergrad, I still had that, I wasn't walking around knowing that, okay, I'm representing or I have to do, but, back at some level in my head, there was always that reminder. But I think after the 3rd year or something, I was just like completely, it wasn't something on my mind, whether I was walking or whatever I was doing, it wasn't constantly off my mind. So I guess my question is, was that, you say you still feel it until today, was that heavy on you in the sense that you were not allowing yourself to be fully yourself, or again, or does it depend on the occasion?
I think like all things, it definitely depends. I think the other added layer, actually, that I feel more now is my dad's career, because he was a pretty prominent scholar. And so now that I am directly in his field, right, and studying African literature, which is what he did, and he's considered kind of like the godfather of this field, that feels heavier to me than you're representing us as family or you're representing Africans, because that's just kind of, it's unfortunate, but that is the truth of the situation, right? Folks are always, I go out and say I'm African, right, first, versus I am technically Edo and Ibibio or, you know, whatever, or Kwa or whatever. But I think that now it does feel heavy as I'm nearing like completion of my graduate studies and moving on with his last name, right, into this field that he hangs over quite largely. And, you know, of course, I mean, when you're a teenager, there are moments when you're like, I don't want to represent everybody. I just want to go out and like dye my hair red because Kelly Rowland had red hair in the music video and I think it looks good, you know? Like, those are real moments. Every teenager goes through those rebellious moments. And I certainly was a difficult teenager. And I'm sure my mom has all kinds of terrible stories that I will never share about all of the ways that I was an awful teenager. So yeah, I mean, of course there are moments when you're like, I wish I could just move in the world as myself. But I also choose to think of those moments. I don't mind that responsibility because I feel accountable to those communities, right? Like I feel accountable to the academics who came before me. I feel very accountable to my family, and to the other, you know, African students here at Penn or whatever. Like, I feel like we're seen as a collective, and I love that. I really like being seen as a collective because it also is a network and it's powerful to me, you know? And we can sit back. I have these two girlfriends here. One is Sierra Leonean, one is Nigerian. She's Igbo, and we talk about this often, right? About what it is to be a African woman in this space in particular. And sometimes we're complaining and sometimes we're very frustrated, and then we all come back to the empowerment because we are not who any of these systems were designed for. And look at us, you know?
Yeah, indeed. Look at you. Nice. Let's talk quickly about then, when did the love or the passion or literature, so you talked about, as you said, your dad being seen as the godfather, like basically being the son of LeBron James. That's like the kind of comparison I can think of here. So, did you love reading at a young age? Were you kind of pushed towards reading a lot, and it becomes a love, a passion? Where did the love story begin?
It's funny. One of my favorite movies is Brown Sugar, and one of the questions that one of the characters always asks the people that he interviews on his show is, when did you fall in love with hip-hop? And for me, like, when did I fall in love with literature? I don't know. It's in my blood. I do remember my parents were really deliberate about reading to us and with us at night, every night before we went to sleep. And we would act out like all the different voices, and I would do different accents for all the different characters in the books that we were reading. So I couldn't not love literature. We were surrounded by books. My parents were always reading to us. We were always exploring parts of the world through literature, and not just, I mean, we had lots of African books, and I knew about the legend of Sunjata before, right, I got to school. But we were also reading things from all over the place, and, you know, different kind of world tales. And one of my favorite books when I was a kid was the Adventures of Little Pear, and I think he's Chinese. You know, I still have it actually. It's like it's in terrible shape, but I still have that book. And so we just grew up in that kind of a house, like a storytelling house, and one that really just valued literature. There were books everywhere, and so I just grew up among the books and never left. Even when, I mean, you know, coming up, I was like, I'm going to be an investment banker. I'm going to be a lawyer. My eldest sister is a lawyer. But I kept coming back. I thought for a while I was going to do sociology, and then in literature, in college, I then majored in French and Francophone literature, and then also comparative literature, because that's where my heart is.
Interesting. Yeah, that was going to be my follow-up question. The move from the end of high school to undergrad. How did you know? Because it's something to know that you like and love reading. It's something to know even the literature world. There's so many segments and sub-segments. I mean, you can be very wide or extremely specific. So was it, I know I'm going to stay in the field, and as a first year is freshman, right?
Yeah.
So as a fresh woman, I'm going to look at everything out there and specialize with time? Or did you know already, I don't care, I know it's going to be Africana Studies? Like, at which point did you specialize and know specifically this is my end goal?
I I appreciate the fresh women because I went to an all-women's school, so I very much appreciate your modification there. I had in college maybe 4 or 5 different majors before I settled on, before I came back to literature, and I was always bouncing back and forth between English and comparative literature. That was my major question. But, I started off thinking sociology. I wanted to do then Africana Studies, kind of largely, and try to be more of a humanist. I think anthropology was in there for a little bit. Linguistics, so I knew what I did know was that math and science were not my field. That was very clear. That's been clear to me since middle school. Okay. And I should tell a story. I remember one time I brought home a report card from algebra class in junior high, 7th or 8th grade. I was it must have been 12, 13. I was nervous to bring it home to my parents because I was getting a C or a B- in math. Mm-hmm. And of course, the immigrants way, school's very important, so the grades are also very important. I remember bringing this home and looking at my dad, and he looks at it and he goes, "Well, maths have never been a strong point in our family, so it's fine." And I was like, "Oh, what a relief!" But that has been my motto. It's my family just doesn't do math. That's not our thing. So I knew math and science were definitely not for me, and so I was trying to discover, kind of the humanities, and I ended up in comparative literature and French for a few reasons. One, because I actually stopped studying French in middle school and high school. I took Latin because, I went to Catholic school, and coming back to French felt like a homecoming. And I remember taking I tested out of the introductory French classes. So to fulfill the language requirement, I was taking a literature class, and it just felt like that's where I needed to be. I knew it, just being able to read again in French, writing in French is still a challenge for me, but being able to communicate and express and resurrect a part of my childhood that felt so central was really liberating. It felt very comfortable. And so I actually declared my French major first. And then I also took a bunch of literature classes, and I was debating between linguistics and comparative literature, but because I wanted to retain the French, I chose comparative literature because it's a field that studies literary tradition across literary traditions, right? So there's the comparative aspect, right? So you are literally comparing, but then there's also underneath it the theory, which is important, and the fact that we're not compared to traditional English departments that you have a requirement where you have to read a text from before 1700 and all of that stuff. I found comparative literature to be a little bit more empowering for my interest in post-colonial and contemporary stuff, meaning post-1960, post-1980.
I see. At which point then did you, because you could have said, you know what, after you graduate from undergrad, that could be, okay, I'm going back to the corporate world, I'm starting to work, and you work with different. When did you decide that was not enough? And, okay, I need to do more than that. I need to dig deeper. Let me start my PhD. So can you walk us through your life after undergrad, your first job, and what led you to not just being a PhD candidate today, but all of the many different roles as a coordinator and instructor that you're having today?
So I started facilitating, to kind of rewind a little bit, when I was in high school. I was a community organizer in high school. We worked for an organization that was youth-led, and so we ran a bunch of trainings on student advising for guidance counselors, closing the achievement gap, advising students of color in particular to go into advanced placement and honors classes in the Boston area. So that, my social justice fire was really lit in high school when I was about 16. When I graduated college, I worked. I actually worked for 5 years in between undergrad and my PhD. And I was working for a nonprofit scholarship organization that sends students to college in cohorts of 10. So these are students coming from public high schools from underrepresented populations that don't typically find themselves encouraged to apply to schools like Penn, and all these kind of elite schools around the country. And so this organization is seeking to kind of narrow that disconnect. So I was working directly with students for about 2.5 years. Then I moved to New York, and I worked in the kind of staff development and curriculum development side of it. And And as someone who is working in curriculum development with college students in general, what was clear to me, because I tried a few other things. I tried to teach first grade. I'm not a first grade teacher. I just don't have that temperament. I do not have the patience.
Too much.
That was not for me. I did it for a summer, and my mom and I were both like, I think this is something that we need to leave behind us. Because that poor woman, I was calling her every day, complaining about what was going on. But what was clear to me was that older students were really my forte, and also college students in particular, because there's something transformational about the college experience, but there's also something really earnest about it. And there's a way that you can engage with students who are, going through this college process that I found really played to my strengths for directness and being able to just tell people how it is. What I was seeing was that my students were graduating college and going to graduate school and getting their degrees. Mm-hmm. And I was in the same job, right? Sitting in my it wasn't even a cubicle, it was an open office space, right? That I was sharing with 4 other people. And I still consult for that organization. I'm very passionate about that org, and I still work with them very closely, and I'm in touch with my students. However, as every year passed, I was feeling this bug to re-engage with theory and to re-engage with literature as academic product, not just as like a hobby, right? So I was reading things, some of the texts that are in my dissertation I read, right, for leisure when they came out, but then that was it. Like, I wasn't able to engage with them. I wasn't able to write about them. I wasn't able to kind of like dissect them and break them apart and find the meaning. I was just reading them and like adding them to my like red shelf on Goodreads, and that wasn't enough.
I see what you mean. And that's a good point, because I wanted to dig on that. Like, most people can say that they when they start working, they're being practical, right? I think some people see that divide is cool, is theory, and then when you want to get to real life, you actually get to work. So you're working, you're actually helping people, as you see their lives evolve. And as you're reading, was it the realization that you needed more argument on top of what you were reading to understand better, and then need more theory? Or was it the love of mentoring and teaching, but with higher or deeper knowledge that you needed to acquire? So what was the move there?
I think it was a little bit more selfish than it was student focused, because I can still engage, and I still do engage with students. I think it was more like, for me to be able to find fulfillment in this practice, I need more training. I feel like I need more. I also feel like I need to engage in a community of people who are doing this, right? Like, I needed to find my flock, and those were academics. And even having conversations with folks who, I have a bunch of good friends from that organization, and we all worked together, who I talked to about these texts, and some of them are themselves now entering academia. There is a level of engagement, a level of kind of critical inquiry that is the norm, right, in academic spaces, that is not the norm outside. And so I felt like I was constantly having to like push that down, to have conversations about like, people always ask me like, what's my favorite book? And that, when you ask an academic, like a literary scholar, what their favorite book is, we'll give you an answer, but it's a different answer every single day, because I'm reading 5 books at a time right now. And favorite isn't an analytical tool, right? Like, what is the analytical purchase of favorite? I can tell you right now what I find very interesting, right, about this book, or the book that's speaking to me the most, because I'm writing my dissertation chapter about it and I'm banging my head against the wall. So I was constantly in those conversations, and I think one day I even just told someone one of my favorite books was like John Grisham, because I was like, I'm tired of this question. It's this airport book. It's The Time to Kill. Just go get it. So I think that it was. I think that was what it was like really wanting to engage analytically. And I think, I do feel the distinction between like the real, the practical, like doing work and reading about it. But I think of my job as an academic to bridge that gap, right? And so we're using the stories to learn about the stakes of some of these social conditions that people are studying that can then affect the way that we engage with those social conditions moving up.
Got it. That makes sense. Okay, thank you very much, Augusta, for this first part. I think it was definitely interesting for me. I hope for our listeners to hear about your history growing up, love for literature, the move even after undergrad to the need to go back and deepen your theory on Africana studies. So I encourage our listeners to follow us to a second part where we're actually going to dig deeper into literature, specifically in Africa. So stay tuned and talk to you soon.